My name is Madison. I am 27 years old. Last Christmas, I watched my entire world shift because of a single sentence. For as long as I can remember, I was just the quiet background noise in my own family's story. My mother could spend an entire hour talking about my brother's latest big dreams and completely forget to ask me a single thing about how I was doing. I was the kid doing her homework at the edge of the kitchen table, while everyone else was busy cheering for him. I had grown used to being the afterthought, the invisible one, right up until that specific night. We were all gathered around the dinner table for Christmas, a scene that looked like it was taken straight out of a holiday movie. There was a golden brown turkey, piles of mashed potatoes, and the soft glow of Christmas lights reflecting in the window. My mother was leaning toward my brother, her face bright as she asked him about his new business idea, laughing and promising him her total support. I was there, of course, silently eating my food like a ghost at the table. That is when my brother, Jackson, looked at me with that same smug look he has had since we were little kids. He asked if I was still wasting my time on that pointless little company of mine. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I just shrugged, acting as if we were talking about the weather. I told him that actually I sold my company. The whole table went dead silent. My brother gave a short, mean laugh. He asked what I sold that pointless company for, even using his fingers to make air quotes. I looked him right in the eye and told him I sold it for $180 million. His jaw did not just drop. It looked like it came unhinged. My mother's face went completely white. The fork she was holding slipped from her hand and hit her plate with a loud bang. In that one silent moment, every year she had ignored me, every time she made me feel like I did not matter, seemed to come crashing down on her instead of me. If you want to know how a daughter who was dismissed by her own mother for years managed to drop a $180 million bomb at Christmas dinner, and what it cost my family after that night, stay with me until the end. I was not always the woman who could say $180 million at a dinner table and watch her mother turn pale. When I was 8 years old, I was just the quiet girl hiding in the kitchen doorway, holding a beat-up plastic cup while my brother's 13th birthday party felt like a royal event. His name is Jackson. He is 5 years older than me, and from the second he was born, he was the center of the universe for my family. That day, my mom, Susan, wheeled a brand new mountain bike into our backyard in the suburbs of Denver. It was shining in the sun. The neighbors were clapping and the other kids were cheering. I heard someone yell that Jackson was destined for great things. My mom hugged him so tight like she was afraid someone might take him away, whispering how proud she was over and over. I was standing just a few feet away in a faded shirt from a thrift store, and not one person thought to ask if I wanted to be in the family photos. For Jackson's birthdays, there were always balloons, catered parties, huge cakes, and sometimes entire weekends dedicated to him. For my birthdays, there was usually a basic cake from the grocery store, a couple of candles, and my mom giving me a half-hearted apology for being so busy. One year, Jackson got a trip to Disney World as a high school graduation gift. I got a card from a CVS and a few $20 bills in an envelope left on the kitchen counter. When Jackson was old enough for school, my mother fought hard to get him into a very expensive private academy. He had perfect uniforms, new Nikes every season, soccer practice, piano lessons, and summer camps that cost more than our car. I went to the local public school with its old paint and textbooks that were 10 years out of date. When I asked why our lives were so different, my mom would just pat my head and say that Jackson needed a special environment to succeed because he was exceptionally bright and had so much potential. She told me I would be fine. At first, it sounded like a compliment, but eventually, "you will be fine" turned into, "we do not have to invest in you." My dad, Robert, was a banker who worked long hours and was hardly ever home for dinner. Even when he was there, he let my mother make every decision about school, activities, and money. There was a clear ranking in our house. Jackson was the center. My mom revolved around him, my dad was far away, and I was somewhere on the edge as long as I did not cause any trouble. By the time I was 12 or 13, I stopped asking for things. I stopped asking why Jackson got the newest iPhone, the best laptop, and expensive tutors while I just made do with what I had. I stopped running into the living room to show off my straight A report cards because my mom would always be on the phone with one of Jackson's teachers or rushing him to practice. If I needed books for a school project, she would sigh and ask if they were really necessary. For Jackson, the answer was always yes. For me, it was always maybe later. So I taught myself how to be independent. I started watching videos online to learn how to cook for myself because I was tired of asking for money for food. In middle school, I got a job washing dishes at a local diner, hiding every dollar I earned in a jar in my closet. That jar of crumpled bills eventually paid for my first used laptop. I started to notice every little insult, saving them up not just as pain, but as a list of reasons to never have to depend on them again. At the dinner table, the conversation was always a long story about Jackson, his soccer games, his SAT scores, or the Ivy League colleges he was looking at. I was there physically, but I was never part of the story. I was just an extra chair. During those quiet years, something changed inside me. I stopped trying to make my mother see me and started building a life where I did not need her approval. I did not realize it then, but all those nights spent as the invisible girl in the corner were important. They were the spark that would one day start a fire for an idea, for a company, and finally, for that Christmas night when my mother would be forced to look at the daughter she had ignored for a lifetime. College was supposed to be my fresh start. I was accepted into the computer science program at the University of Colorado Boulder with a partial scholarship. When the email came, I sat on my bed and read it 3 times to make sure it was real. My mom looked at the screen, said, "That is great, honey," and then immediately asked if I could help her check an email she was sending to one of Jackson's professors. A week later, Jackson got his acceptance letter from MIT, and our living room turned into a massive celebration. There was a party, relatives came over, champagne was opened, and a big banner was hung up. My mom cried with joy, telling everyone her son was going to change the world. When I left for Boulder, she gave me a quick hug at the curb, said she was proud, and then drove off because she had an appointment. When Jackson left for MIT, she flew across the country with him, spent days helping him decorate his dorm, and posted a huge photo album on Facebook. My own move-in day was just me dragging 2 suitcases and a used comforter I bought myself into a tiny apartment I shared with 2 other students. It was the kind of place where you could hear everything the neighbors said through the walls. My scholarship covered some of the cost, but I still needed money. To pay the bills, I got a job at a coffee shop near campus. My days started at 4:30 in the morning, putting on a green apron and spelling names wrong on cups for hours before rushing to my computer science lectures, with coffee stains on my clothes. Between classes, I would stay in the library with my old laptop, learning how to code from free tutorials because I could not afford the textbooks. While other students were going to parties, I was teaching myself how to build mobile apps from scratch. I did not feel bad for myself. It felt like I was building something that was entirely mine. The idea that changed everything came from hearing people complain. My friends were always tired. They would stay up all night eating junk food, skip the gym for weeks, and then wonder why they felt terrible. My roommate once said she wished something would just tell her to get up and drink some water. One afternoon, sitting at a messy cafe table, it hit me. What if there was one simple app that helped people track the basics, like their food, exercise, and sleep, and gently reminded them to have better habits without being annoying? I started drawing screens in a cheap notebook, simple graphs for sleep and progress bars for workouts. I wanted the reminders to feel like a text from a friend, not an alarm. I called it Summit Wellness. I would get home from the lab late at night, eat some ramen, and code until 3 in the morning. The first version was a bit rough, but it worked. You could log your meals, track your water, and see your progress. I shared it with some friends and waited for them to tell me what they thought. They were honest. They told me the buttons were in weird spots and the charts were ugly. It hurt, but I fixed every single problem they mentioned. Slowly, people started talking about it. A girl in my class told her boyfriend, who told his friends, and they shared it in their group chats. Someone left a nice review online that was so kind it made me cry in the bathroom at work. The day Summit Wellness made its first $500 from ads, I just stared at the screen. It was not a lot of money, but it was more than my family had ever given me. I used that money to buy a better laptop so I could work faster. Around that time, Jackson would call from MIT, talking about networking events and the tech scene. My mom would go on and on about his classes and the opportunities he had. One night, I tried to tell her about Summit Wellness. I told her I had over 1,000 users and that people were actually using something I built. She just said, "That is nice, dear," and then started talking about how Jackson might get a big internship. I sat there with the phone to my ear, listening to her talk about my brother's future while my real app was being downloaded by strangers. It was the same story over and over. Every time I had a small success, my mom would either not ask or would talk about Jackson instead. Eventually, I stopped trying to tell her. I let her believe I was just messing around with some computer thing. Meanwhile, I kept working. I studied during my breaks at the coffee shop and wrote code on napkins. I would watch people at the gym checking their phones and imagine my app being on every single one of them. I was not doing it for revenge or money. I was doing it because it felt amazing when a user told me that the app was actually helping them. I did not know it then, but those long nights were the start of something much bigger than a college project. Summit Wellness was growing, and so was I. Eventually, those roots would be strong enough to break out of the box my family had kept me in. I graduated a semester early because I had to. I took extra classes because I could not afford to stay in school any longer. While my classmates were planning trips to Europe, I was signing a lease for a small office in a boring building in Denver. It had stained carpets and a view of a parking garage. But to me, it was perfect. Summit Wellness was a real company now. I opened a business bank account and put everything I had into that room. My life was nonstop. Mornings were for answering emails and fixing bugs. Afternoons were for new features. Nights were for learning how to market the app. I replied to every single review and messaged users who stopped using the app to ask why. I paid a designer to make the app look professional. Slowly, the numbers started to change. Downloads became a steady stream. A local trainer started recommending the app to his clients. Then a gym asked for a custom version for their members. I said yes to everything. I added a premium version for a few dollars a month. The day our revenue hit $50,000, I felt the room spin. It was not enough to retire, but it was real. I hired 2 junior developers, people just like me who needed a chance. We worked in that tiny office, drinking cheap coffee and updating the app every week. During all of this, Jackson's big dreams started to fall apart. His first startup, a delivery service, failed completely. He spent $100,000 of our mother's money before closing it and moving back home. Susan called me crying about how mean the world was to her brilliant boy and how he just needed a break. She hardly asked about me. When she did, she just asked if that app was still going okay, like it was a hobby. I kept my answers short. I never mentioned the money or the employees. It felt like there was no point. While Jackson was working part-time at an electronics store and talking about his next big thing, I was making deals with major fitness centers. A health insurance company even contacted us for a pilot program. I was still driving an old car and eating at the office. From the outside, I did not look successful, but inside, everything was changing. One day, I got an email from a big tech company. They wanted to talk about buying us. I went to the meeting in my only nice blazer, trying not to look like a kid who lived on burritos. They offered $50 million for Summit Wellness. For a second, I thought about calling my mom to hear her say she was proud, but then I heard their plan. They wanted total control and wanted to fill the app with ads. It felt like a betrayal to my users. I said no. My lawyer thought I was crazy, but saying no showed everyone that we were serious. A venture capital firm reached out soon after. They did not want to buy us, they wanted to invest. I negotiated hard and took an $8 million investment. We opened another office, hired more people, and added mental health tools to the app. We hit 1 million users. Our revenue was now in the millions. At 25, I bought a penthouse in Denver with a view of the mountains. I still drove my old car and wore hoodies. My life was big, but I kept it quiet. The offer that finally made sense came from a huge healthcare provider. They wanted to keep my team and the brand, using their resources to reach millions more people. They offered $180 million. The talks lasted for months. My days were full of legal papers and video calls. When the deal was done, I felt numb. After everything was paid, I had about $110 million to my name. I did not call my mom. I called a therapist. I finally talked about what it was like to be the invisible child. We talked about every missed birthday and every time my mother chose Jackson over me. I expected to feel like I won, but I just felt tired. I started donating to charities, especially ones for women's mental health. I realized I did not need my mother or Jackson to clap for me anymore. Their opinion did not matter. What I needed was closure. I needed to see what would happen if I went back to that house as the woman they refused to see. My therapist suggested I go home for Christmas as an experiment. I was not going there to get anything from them, just to observe. I booked a flight to Denver. I did not tell my mom about the sale. I just texted her that I was free for Christmas. She was very excited, saying Jackson would be there too and it would be like old times. That made me laugh because the old times were exactly what I was preparing for. I stayed at a hotel instead of the house because I wanted a door I could lock. On Christmas Eve, I landed in Denver. The next day, I drove to my mom's house. The neighborhood looked smaller and a bit older. Her house still had the same faded blue paint. The only new thing was a plastic reindeer in the yard. My heart was beating fast, but it was not fear. My mom opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing an apron and the house smelled like turkey. For a second, I saw the mom I used to follow around with my drawings. Then she gave me a polite hug and asked if I was still doing my computer stuff. I said yes, and she immediately started talking about Jackson. She said he was doing so much better and had a brilliant new business idea. Her eyes were full of excitement when she talked about him. I went inside. The house was a shrine to Jackson. There were photos of him everywhere, in his football gear, at his graduation, in suits. There were no photos of me. I saw one old photo of Jackson on his bike with my mom's arm around him, and I was just a blurry shape on the edge of the frame. My mom called out that I was there. Jackson was on the couch with a beer, watching a game. He gave me a lazy look and asked if I was still single and buried in my little app. I just smiled and said it was nice to see him too. I helped my mom in the kitchen. She gave me a towel and asked me to help with the salad. She poured a big glass of wine for Jackson and one for herself, but she just pointed me toward the tap water. It was a small thing, but it showed the same old ranking. I listened to them talk about Jackson's big plans and how she was going to help him start over. No one asked about my life. I realized I did not care. I was just watching how she revolved around him and how I was back in the role of the quiet helper. When we sat down for dinner, the seats were the same as they always were. Jackson at one end, my mom next to him, and me off to the side. But I was not the same person. Dinner started with my mother focusing entirely on Jackson. She laughed at his jokes and asked about his business like he was already a huge success. He talked about an online store for sports gear and said he just needed some money to start. My mom nodded and said she told him she would help. I just drank my water and stayed quiet. They talked about his workout and some guy he knew. I might as well have been a plant. When my mother finally looked at me, she used a bored tone. She asked if I was still at my computer job and working on that app. I put my fork down. I could have said it then, but I just said I was still working on it. She looked relieved she did not have to ask more. She said as long as I was paying my bills, that was what mattered, acting like I was a kid with a part-time job. Jackson smirked and said I was fine with my little project. Then he asked if I was still wasting my time on that pointless company. That was the word. Pointless. I did not move. I just looked at him and said I sold my company. The room went silent. I could hear the fridge humming. My mom stopped eating. Jackson laughed and asked who would buy it and for how much, using those air quotes again. I told him a healthcare group bought Summit Wellness. Jackson snorted and asked if I got a couple $100,000, enough to move out of my small apartment. He was getting red in the face. He asked exactly how much I sold it for. My mom was staring at me now. I waited a second and then said, $180 million. Jackson's mouth literally fell open. The fork fell out of my mom's hand and hit the plate. Her face went white. No one moved or breathed. Then they started yelling. My mom said it was not a funny joke and that I was lying. Jackson said I was not that smart and no one would pay that for a phone app. I pulled out my phone and showed them my bank balance. It was a very long number. I told them that was after taxes and paying my team. My mom leaned in, trying to count the zeros. Jackson grabbed the phone, his hands shaking, looking for a trick. Then he used his own phone to look it up. He saw my face in a news article. The headline said 27-year-old founder sells health app for $180 million. He looked at me like I was a stranger. My mom's eyes were wet. She asked why I did not tell them and how I could keep that from my family. I asked if she meant the same way she kept everything for Jackson. I mentioned the private school, the trips, and the $100,000 she gave him for a failed business. I mentioned how she forgot my birthdays, but flew across the country for him. She tried to say they did their best and supported me. I told her no. She supported him and built her world around him. I told her she said I would be fine, just so she did not have to try. I told her I built everything without any of their help, and she could not play the victim now. Jackson hit the table and asked if I thought I was better than them now because of money. He called me the same weird little sister. I stood up slowly. I was calm. I told him Luck did not write code or answer emails at 3 a.m. I told him Luck did not clean up his messes, but Mom did. I looked at her and told her she gambled on the wrong child and was only mad because the one she ignored learned how to win. My mom tried to grab my arm and said we could talk and that maybe I could help Jackson. She said we were family and should stick together. There it was. Not an apology, just a request to help Jackson. Her ranking system was still there. I told her I did stick together for years, but she never noticed. I pushed my chair back and told them to enjoy their dinner. I walked out of that house, leaving my mother pale and my brother speechless. The fallout was a slow collapse. I went back to my hotel and sat in the dark. I expected a lot of calls, but they did not come right away. The next morning, my mom sent long texts about family and how I humiliated Jackson. Then Jackson called me selfish and ungrateful. I did not answer. 2 days later, a lawyer sent a letter demanding $3 million as payment for raising me. It was like they were trying to put a price on a childhood they barely gave me. I sent it to my lawyer, who sent back a very cold response. He said no and included a list of all the money they spent on Jackson versus the zero they spent on me. He said if they kept going, those records would become public. They dropped it immediately. Jackson's life started to fall apart. He was angry that I won a race he did not know we were in. He started drinking and got fired from his job after a video of him yelling at a customer went viral. People found out he was the brother of the rich girl he was complaining about online. His business idea never happened. He had a lot of debt, and my mom tried to save him again. She sold the house and gave him all her money, but it was not enough. Within a year, the house was gone. My mom moved into a small apartment and her health got worse. The relatives who used to watch her praise Jackson stopped calling. The next Christmas, I was in Hawaii with friends. I donated a lot of money to a charity for women's mental health. A younger cousin messaged me saying my story made her feel better about being the overlooked kid in her family. I became a mentor to her. Later, a letter came from my mother. She said she was sorry for everything and hoped I would forgive her so we could start over. I read it and put it in a drawer. I had already forgiven myself for not being able to fix her. I did not send them money. I kept my boundaries to protect myself. I focused on my new company and started telling my story to help others. I learned that your worth is not about how much your parents cheer for you. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop waiting for people to see you and start seeing yourself. If you were in my shoes, what would your version of walking out of that dinner look like? Finish of story.